Hello everyone and welcome back to Big Tent live events. We hope you've enjoyed the summer insofar as there's been a summer, and we are delighted to continue our live event online series brought to you by Torch, the Oxford Research Centre for the Humanities, as part of the Humanities Cultural Programme, itself one of the founding stones for the future Stephen A. Schwarzman Centre for the Humanities, a centre here in Oxford which will have public engagement with research and with performance, dance, music, theatre, cinema at its core. My name is Wes Williams and I'm a Professor of French Literature at the University of Oxford, a Fellow of St Edmund Hall, and I'm also, officially as of next week, the Director of Torch. This term's Big Tent live event series will bring together each week researchers and students, performers and practitioners from across the different humanities disciplines. Our aim here, as regular viewers will know, is to explore together important subjects and to ask challenging questions about areas such as the environment, medical humanities, ethics and AI, the public and the private and the common good. And we'll celebrate storytelling and music, performance and poetry, identity and community. If you would like to put any questions to our speakers during the event tonight, please pop them in the comments box on YouTube. We encourage you to submit these as early as possible, and I can then ensure that they inform and enrich the Q&A part of our discussion in about half an hour or so. Now, on to our excellent speakers tonight. I can't tell you how excited and honoured I am to host and welcome, joining us for the first event of this term's online series, Katie Mitchell and Ben Whishaw. I'm going to embarrass them both by saying a few words of introduction before we start our conversation. I'll start with Katie Mitchell, whose unique style, rigorous and some say uncompromising method have established her powerful reputation as both a maker and a thinker, as someone engaged in an ongoing, innovative exploration of the possibilities of live performance. Her work is well known to audiences across the globe. In a career spanning 30 years, she has directed over 100 productions, including text-based theatre, opera, installations, and multimedia work. From her early days as an assistant director with Paines Plough and the RSC, to her recent success with La Maladie de la Mort, created at the Théâtre des Bouffes du Nord in Paris, and Orlando at Berlin's Schaubühne, Mitchell has become renowned for bold and innovative productions, which make rich use of multimedia in live, and as we should say now, locked down performance as well. Working with ancient classical texts, as well as achingly contemporary writers and themes, Katie has collaborated with the Royal Opera House, the National Theatre, the RSC, the Royal Court, as well as theatres across Europe, and indeed the US, to produce work which provokes and inspires in equal measure. Her many awards include the Evening Standard Best Director Award, the British Academy's President's Medal. In 2009, she was presented with the Order of the British Empire, an OBE, for her services to theatre. She read English at Magdalen College, and we might reflect on whether that was or was not good training for her life and work in the theatre. She's also enjoyed a fruitful relationship with the university over the years, including a stint as a visiting chair in opera studies in 2016-17. And I'm thrilled to say that today's conversation marks the beginning of her time here as the first ever visiting fellow in theatre in our Humanities Cultural Programme. Welcome, Katie, again.
Thank you.
I'm also delighted to welcome Ben Whishaw this evening. A multi-award winning actor in film, television and theatre, Ben trained at RADA, and his work quickly brought acclaim, including a much lauded Hamlet at the Old Vic with Trevor Nunn, way back, it seems to me, in 2004. He has worked with or been directed by, and we might come back to that, Katie Mitchell, multiple times, including The Seagull at the National Theatre in 2006, and recently Norma Jean Baker of Troy at the Shed in New York, I think just last year. In television, his work ranges from BAFTA-winning performances in Richard II as part of the amazing Hollow Crown for the BBC in 2012 to his extraordinary and multi-award-winning portrayal of Norman Scott in A Very English Scandal in 2018. Among many film roles, from Bright Star, where he gave an exquisite account of Keats, by way of Ariel, both there and not there, in Julie Taymor's Tempest, and Paddington, delighting audiences young and old as the voice of the refugee bear in the hit movies 2014 and 17, all the way then from Hamlet to Q in all those Bond films since 2012 Skyfall. Welcome, Ben, and thank you for taking time out from what I know is a hectic schedule today.
Oh, my pleasure. Lovely to be here.
Katie and Ben, you've generously agreed to discuss your work across and between different media, and I think we agreed it might be useful to have as a focus for our collective thinking this question that's sort of obsessing all of us at the moment, which is live performance. The many ways in which liveness can take, well, the many forms liveness can take on film, on stage, on Zoom, and so on. But before we get into kind of nitty-gritty stuff, I thought it might be useful just to have, you know, in a sense, from the horse's mouth, if you like, how you got to be working in the ways that you are now. How did you come to theatre? How did you come to directing, Katie? How did you come to acting? In a sense, how does one get to be Katie Mitchell? How does one get to be Ben Whishaw in terms of the performance lives that you've led? Katie, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Well, when I was a young person, I really wanted to be a visual artist. So my dream was to be a painter. And I don't think I had a very good teacher. And so I was made to feel that because I couldn't represent a tree beautifully or do a sort of line drawing of a nude beautifully, that I didn't have the right to be inside the visual arts field. So I sort of moved sideways into theatre as a sort of second best, and then found that very sort of addictive and very, very interesting form. And then the big influences on me after the move from visual arts to theatre were always work from abroad. So I didn't really feel any connection with any of the work that was happening in the UK as a young woman in the 1980s. So most of my influences came from a very big trip I made to Eastern Europe, to Russia, Georgia, Lithuania, and Poland, where I researched directors' training and saw amazing practitioners and learned a lot about Stanislavski, and also seeing work that was coming into the UK from abroad. Anyway, I then did about 15 years of working on naturalism in mainstream text-based theatre, but I always wanted to go back to a more sort of visual arts influence, making work that was to do with the crossover between theatre and other mediums. And so I then had a breakthrough show going into live cinema, which then set off what I would consider my real career. That's me. Over to you, Ben.
I got taken to an audition for a youth theatre when I was 13 by my dad. And it was a youth theatre in a town just down the road from the village I grew up in. And I was quite a shy 13-year-old. And I think my dad must have thought it would do me good. And I liked acting. I'd done acting at school, but I had never explored it further than that. Anyway, so I went to this audition and I got into this youth theatre, and it changed my life in a way. And we did extraordinary things there. We did Greek plays, and we did adaptations of books, and we did devised pieces. And anyway, I guess it became the thing I loved most. And then I decided it's what I wanted to do. And then I went to RADA when I was 19. And then I guess I was just extremely lucky. And and I got some nice work, and one thing led to another, and then you meet wonderful people, and wonderful people like Katie, who I've been fortunate enough to sort of build, you keep working with over time. Yeah. So, well, that's what's happened for me.
That's really, thank you both. I'm really interested, Ben, in your saying that youth theatre was a way into this for you, and the list of things that you mentioned. So, kind of ancient texts, but adaptations of things, devising stuff. And it seems to me that there's you don't always get a chance to do that as a professional actor because you're too busy working with ready-made scripts or working on ready-made stuff. Is that a shame for you? Do you think that you would like to do that kind of devising, making, adapting work again? Or once one's become an actor, does one just do the one thing?
No, I would like to, and I feel like I have had experiences that have felt close to what I experienced as a teenager at the youth theatre with Katie, actually, and some other people. No, I've enjoyed sometimes having experiences where a text is just the beginning of a process and a launch pad. And then it's something that's made kind of collectively, not as much as I would like, but but I've tasted it and I appreciate it very much. Yeah.
Because Katie, coming back to you, in what you say, your as it were real career post live cinema. I mean, that's about adaptation, remaking, reworking, as much as it is about just staging a ready-made text, isn't it? Or am I over-interpreting?
Yes, I think it is, because of course the first live cinema show I did was Virginia Woolf's The Waves.
Yep.
And in fact, my wish to do that stemmed back to my time at Oxford, where I did a special paper on Virginia Woolf. So I would say there's something gorgeous about being free a little bit of the of a play text and having the problem, if you like, of a novel. And in that case, the problem of a novel with no dialogue and no narrative, really. And then collaborating in a different way with performers and one's creative team to push the boundaries of what the form of live performance can be. I mean, that doesn't mean I didn't really relish many of the journeys I took with various play texts. You know, our journey on the Seagull, Ben, was really, fantastic. I just think it's sort of just going through the threshold into different types of material creates different types of working processes and relationships, and different form outcomes, which I find more exciting probably than the well-made play text. But maybe that also is just a natural weariness, having done something for 15 years, or sort of a curiosity about new forms and departures.
Yeah. Do you have to get into a different sort of head and heart and body space to work on a text like The Seagull? In other words, that sort of already exists, that's been around for a long time, that a lot of people have their own versions of and so on, than say something that's never been made before? Does it matter to either of you, really, that this is something that has a kind of a performance history or a collective history about it? Do you feel responsible in a sense for that performance history or that collective history, or do you think, no, this is an encounter between me or us and the group of people putting on this story here and now? Sorry, that was a bit of a long question, but
gorgeous question. Ben, you go.
I would try not to think, from an actor's perspective, I would try not to think about the performance history. Of course, you can't be completely ignorant of it, but I wouldn't go and watch, not that that would be necessarily possible in theatre, but I wouldn't want to have my, go back and watch other actors' interpretations or read about them or anything. I wouldn't find that helpful. And you want to sort of come to it in yourself at this point in time, bringing yourself to it. No, I try not to think too much, but try and treat it like people say, like it's a brand new thing. But also I'm always aware, particularly with plays that are older texts, that the director is probably going to be bringing in choices, and well, hopefully, and so you're open to that as well.
Yeah.
But Katie, I suspect for you, you might be more aware, and that it might direct you more strongly about where you want to take the production, having been aware of the history of the play.
Yes, I think as a director compared to the actor, I think you have to be mindful of the production history, and particularly when you're dealing with Chekhov, because with that particular writer and those particular plays, the production history has sort of got tangled up with the original material. So that production history, which really was sort of late 60s, early 70s, Royal Shakespeare Company way of staging it as very slow, contemplative pieces of drama, that has been mistaken for the actual original Russian radical material. So when you're sort of trying to work out how to conceive and stage a play like The Seagull, you're already being forced into a conversation with the production history and the material, and you've got to somehow cut your way through both. And I think that was, I remember in the preparing of The Seagull, that was quite a challenge to work out how to present it in a way that tried to cut away the barnacles, if you like, of all sort of production history, and just get back to that sharp, very avant-garde shock of a symbolist play. And I think we really tried, didn't we, Ben? When I brought that idea to rehearsals, we really tried to work with that. And we were thoroughly told off.
No, you were thoroughly trounced by various people for doing so.
For that attempt. It was very interesting. We made it, didn't we, at the National Theatre in London. I then went a couple of years later to Copenhagen and repeated exactly the same production. And it was seen in a completely different way, as a sort of necessary relief that, you know, some part of the radicalism of the original material had been repositioned culturally. But such is the sort of difference of making different plays in different countries. I come off the point. So that in response to your answer, yes, the production history in the case of such a major writer is quite significant in terms of how the director approaches and conceives the material, but hopefully not in a way that burdens the actor. That's more just the director alone cutting through the jungle of it.
And Ben, presumably that's true for the Shakespeare work that you've done, say. I mean, presumably, I don't know, you don't go and look at other people's versions of Hamlet before you do your Hamlet, or other people's versions of Ariel before you do your Ariel. You in a sense leave that job to the director in a way, so that you can work your own particular craft. Is that right?
I would choose to. I know other actors who like to know how it's been done before, so that you can do something different with it or something like that. But I just think, I don't know. I would rather just kind of, as I said, so to come to it as myself and how it speaks to me. At that moment in time.
But don't you think that, Ben, there's a different way that how the director looks at a play and how the actor looks at a play are quite different? I was reflecting on this recently with my students, and I was saying it's like, if you imagine as the director looking at a play text, it's like looking at a house with lots of entry points or doorways. One's marked Hamlet, the other's marked Ophelia, then it's Polonius. So, and as a director, you've got to walk through all of the doors of all of the characters and then work out how they all fit together. And that's quite a burdensome and complex task, whereas the actor has a burdensome and complex task, but different. They just go through one door and they just rigidly just stay Hamlet, door, corridor, and they stay in that one. I wonder whether that's
you're responsible for, in a way. I mean, I do think you are responsible for the whole play. But, or at least, I don't know. I think you have to be aware of the production you're in. And I think this is something that I've enjoyed about working with you, Katie, is that, and it's rare, but that an actor in your production, in one of your productions, knows the kind of production he's in and the world he's in. And it's not going to be a production where every single actor's slightly in another in another production, which I've seen. I think everybody has seen a lot of, when there's this jarring thing going on where no one's quite on the same page. And I love that. So that is to do with being aware of having an overview of the whole thing. But you're right in that basically you have to be completely immersed and absorbed in the way your character is seeing things.
But how we build character using the Stanislavski technique means that we construct characters for all biographies for all of the characters, and all of those biographies are woven together. So you couldn't play Hamlet without knowing when you first met Ophelia, and the actress playing Ophelia couldn't be playing it without knowing when she had first met you. And all of those sort of biographies are woven together. And I think that creates a real sense of sort of shared past. And from that comes a sense of shared focus, doesn't it? Which is really useful. Good old Stanislavski.
Okay, you've got ahead of me. I was going to ask you about Stanislavski, but I was going to get there through the Russians, but we can get there through Hamlet as well, if you like.
No, go through the Russians.
Well, no, only because, okay, so we talked about the seagull. A little bird told me, Ben, that you're very interested in Dostoevsky's The Idiot, and in ways in which one might sort of transform that into something like a performance piece. So here's a kind of test for you both. How would you start doing that from a kind of Stanislavski perspective? What would you, because does the novel tell you everything you need to know in terms of all the relationships you've just been talking about, Katie, you know, who meets who, when, and so on? Or do you have to sort of write out even further from the novel? Basically, how do you transform The Idiot into a show with the help of Stanislavski?
Well, a big thing that would, this is another thing I really love, and I don't mean to sound like I'm just sort of praising Katie endlessly, but it's unusual for an actor to have this kind of experience. So what was brilliant about Katie's process is that it's very clear. You begin the same. It wouldn't matter what the source material was. You begin everything the same, and it would begin with questions, really, Katie, wouldn't it? Like you establish the facts. You'd go through the thing and write that. You'd go through the text and you'd write down the things that you can certainly know about the characters and the world. And so that's where it sort of all begins. You collate as much information as possible, and then you see where the gaps are. Right. And what happens is a sort of filling out of a backstory, isn't it, Katie? Which becomes a really completely addictive sort of process for me and for most actors, I'd say, who work with you.
You're muted, Katie. Somehow you've muted yourself. Okay.
It's because my lovely daughter just came in and I didn't want the sound of her shoes in the background. Forgive me. Yes, it's a classic, actually, Stanislavski technique where you just go through a text and you look for all the facts about the past. Not the present. You're not doing the present analysis. You're looking for the past, and then anything that you can't really understand, you ask as a question. So if we take the seagull, I don't really know The Idiot well enough. Do you know The Idiot well enough to talk about that? If we take the seagull, or maybe Hamlet, we take the Hamlet. You know, when did Ophelia first meet Hamlet, and where, and what happened? That may be a question that you ask.
Okay.
And then you try to answer it as simply as you possibly can, cross-referencing the text and looking for the simplest impression the text gives you of the answer. And then you answer it. And then masses of questions like that, and then masses of facts. And then at the end of that, you've got a list of facts and all your answered questions, all about the past. And then you just assiduously put them in chronological order. And all the time you're building the past in order to play the present. It just helps you play all the present action, the building of the past biography. It's not a diversion, or it's not a sop to the actor. So it's to help them play the present. So it's a very particular, rigorous technique, which is one of many steps that Stan has. And then after you've built the past, you build the place, and then you build the immediate circumstances, which was what's just happened 24 hours before the scene. And then you analyze the present action using tools called events and intentions, which are very familiar to lots of people, very classic Russian tools. Where are the main changes in the scene? And in between the changes, what are all characters playing to each other? So it's very, very simple and gorgeous system, but it's very detailed. And the thing about working with Ben, I mean, he's just incredible. He's very, very, very detailed as a performer, which means that he's not only works very closely on a very detailed analysis of where all the changes, both micro and macro, are in a text, but he can also calibrate all of the psychological shifts of those intentions around those changes in a way that's just so refined and nuanced. And he likes doing it. So a lot of people get a bit tired. Think, oh God, I've got a play text. I've got 400 events and, 400 intentions. That's really dull. I want to play something simpler. But Ben, he's the opposite. He goes, I think we missed an event here, Katie. Can we add 401? And then every single inch of what he's doing on stage in terms of playing, he needs to be precise about. And that leads to a sort of density and complexity in terms of the psychology, which is sort of a breathtaking level of skill, which very few performers can achieve. It's breathtaking. Just got to say it, Ben, sorry.
No, I agree. I think we can't just have this as Ben loves Katie. I think there's an element in which it goes in the other direction too. And I think I can see why. And I kind of more seriously, I wonder, Ben, do you carry that sort of stuff over into film and TV work? So I'm thinking of the Norman, the very British, I've forgotten the title now, but that was a character where it struck me that you were doing incredibly detailed work as part of that character, rather than just sort of being.
No, I do apply it. It's impossible to apply it in the same way and to the same degree because, well, one, in the case of A Very English Scandal, it was made for telly. There's not the time to do that kind of detailed work either beforehand or during the process. But yeah, I do apply it, and I always make a biography now.
Right.
And I always work out the facts of the past, and I will always fill in, and I'll always work out my intentions and events, even if on the day, the whole thing turns out to be nothing like what you'd imagined, and you can't really use it. You've got it there as you've got it there in your back pocket, kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, we've in a sense already answered the question, can you teach this stuff? Insofar as you've both said, well, Stanislavski's method is one way of learning this stuff, at least. Neither of you have claimed that it's the only way, but you clearly both find it really, really useful as a way of kind of, in a sense, measuring and understanding the craft, to use your book title, Katie, the craft of it all. Just to kind of put an end to this little bit of the conversation, it seems to me that both of you seem to think of your work as craft, as made things, like, I don't know, a goldsmith or a silversmith, or you're making stuff in an extraordinary detail that is beautiful. Is that fair?
Well, I think that's one thing that I really love. Sorry, again, about this process of working, and because it does sort of demystify things, because you and there is a lovely feeling of like, well, you because otherwise there are a million ways you could try to approach a text or anything, and if you've got these, it's a toolkit, and it is a sort of like, you can make it, you can apply it every time, and sometimes you don't need to, and sometimes other things will happen, and there's space for other things to blow in, but you're not going to have that crisis of like, fuck, I don't know
who I am,
what I'm doing. And would you say the same, Katie?
I think it's enormously important and useful to have a sense of I think there's something about it, maybe the most useful thing is a sense of for the time that we're all together making a show, everyone agrees to one way of working, because as you say, Wes, there are so many different ways, and as you say, we don't claim that this is absolute. I think this is very tried and tested, let's say, because if you think that I learnt it from someone called Lev Dodin, who studied with someone called Tovstonogov, who studied with Stanislavski, it's close to transmission, and then so many people have used these tools, so that all of the weaknesses of the tools have been sort of ejected over time. So they're really well-made tools, and they're enormously useful for directors and actors. And I think the demystifying is really important. Just going into the director's other tasks that they have to do, not just working with performers. You know, my mission would definitely to nail the skills, both hard and soft skills, so that the process of directing is demystified in order that anyone can do it. Because there is still a little bit of sort of zhuzh and mystery around the craft of directing, which can put a lot of people off. And it is a field dominated by one diversity group who don't understand themselves as a diversity group. So I think it's the more you can demystify the processes and nail the skills, the better for access to the field, basically. And bringing a lot of people, even like, you know, Ben describes himself going to that youth theatre, you know, there he is given the tools and off he goes. I mean, that's so important, you know.
Can we talk about a different set of tools for a moment? And that's the tools that have had to be developed. Well, you were already doing that. You've already worked with them, both of you. So Katie in terms of live cinema and Ben in terms of cinema, TV and so on. But obviously in the last 6 months to a year, the tools that we're working with now, the tools of the screen, of the camera, of something called live performance that is also not actually where people aren't present. Do you have thoughts on the difficulties of live performance now, and the kind of, does digital performance offer an exciting possibility, or is it always going to be a kind of second grade version of the sort of what you might call the holy grail of being there in the room with somebody?
I mean, of course it's different, but we can't make anything live at the moment. And that is going to be for a long period of time. And as we all know, more pandemics will come in the future. So we have to have other systems. And so we have to sort of, for my money, to relinquish the holy grail of the live experience and accept and welcome in different versions, like this experience now of us communicating via Zoom. We have to welcome in those versions because we still have the existential needs that live performance was fulfilling. It was dealing with all the complex parts of what it is to be human, you know, and we still have those needs, and we still need the narratives, and we still need the sort of reflections back on our behavior and experience and perceptions. So we are going to have to find other ways of creating, which are not us all being together in the same live space, but through different digital platforms. And I was already investigating that actually before the pandemic hit. Part of sort of an interest that I have in trying to reduce our carbon footprint, particularly when we're making big international touring products. And so I was working with a choreographer called Jerome Bell at a Swiss theatre in Lausanne called Vidi. And we were working up a way of making a show where there was no travel, which would mean there would be Jerome in Paris and me in London, rehearsing via Zoom, local performers in Lausanne. And then when it tours, no one moved, basically. New local performers in the next city would work with either me and Jerome via Zoom, or a new local director with a performance score. And there'd been literally zero movement and travel of either people or elements. So already I was beginning to think, you know, as time passes and the environmental catastrophe sort of crashes onto us, we need new systems for working. So for me, I think it's an awful time, full stop, for everyone. But there are some advantages in it in terms of our sector. You know, I think it make us sort of come up with new forms of working and communicating, and just I have to relinquish the holy grail of the live thing. I mean, as you know, I've already done so much live cinema that I'm not so.
You know, I mean, liveness is a moot question in your recent work anyway, and where, you know, what am I watching? Is this live? Is this in the same time as that? And all the rest of it's been explored anyway in what you do. So I can see why for you this does, you know, acknowledging all the horribleness of it, nonetheless represent a kind of artistic challenge and opportunity. I wonder for Ben, again, do you grasp this as a kind of possible utopian even future, or do you just think, damn it, I want to be in the room with people? I want to be in the room where it happened, as Hamilton said.
to be completely honest, I have felt so sort of knocked for six by it all. I'm still getting my head around everything. I mean, I'm really inspired to hear what you're saying, Katie, actually. But I mean, I haven't even really felt like doing any. I mean, it's fortunate because there is no work to do, but I haven't felt like doing any work. I've been really, and I feel sort of guilty to admit that because so many people are having to work so hard. But I have enjoyed, I have to confess, sort of like having a fallow period. So I feel I'm still in that time. So I feel like I can't really answer anything. I'm very curious to know, because I think Kate is absolutely right. This isn't going to obviously change anytime very soon. So we're going to have to adapt.
And so maybe I could put a question to you that's come from the audience. I mean, we've already started actually thinking about some of the audience questions, but if a project came to you, Ben, which was working on a live streamed play, would that interest you? Or would you think, no, I need to have the audience directly there with me?
No, it would interest me if the people if the project was good and the people were interesting. Yeah.
Okay. So if Katie comes along and says, right, we need to do something that's digital now.
Yeah.
Well, we've just been having that conversation, but just in our green room before we were already opening up that conversation. But the thing is, it's not about having a challenge and an opportunity. It's a necessity.
Sure.
And I think this really was struck home to me when very early on during lockdown, a friend of mine had been part of a conversation going on apparently in Manchester about a new performance building that was opening. And the architect had been sent back to the drawing board to make the building work socially distanced. And I think that was it must have been March, someone mentioned this to me. And I thought, oh my God. That was just so serious for me. So it's a real turning point. I thought it's long term. We're looking at the long term, not the short term. And then, of course, I've always got formal intellectual curiosity. How is it possible to make this experience that we have normally together when we're separate? What can that be? And that it is intellectually interesting.
Okay, so again, you've answered one of the questions, which have you used quarantine time to progress as an artist? In what way?
Oh my God. Well, I used quarantine time. I thought, what should I do with my time as show after show went down? And I've had a lot of fantastic use of my time, actually. I've spent most of my time teaching young people, actually, in many, many different countries, teaching mainly directing, but sometimes acting in the UK, Germany, France, Italy. I'm going to be teaching people in Norway, Copenhagen, Milan, lots of different groups. So it's given me access to the younger generation in a way that I've not had for a long time. And I've really, really relished that. And I've taken a huge amount from that, including my MA students at Royal Holloway. So I've done that, but also been able to build up projects which are looking at a blend of digital and theatre. So we're doing a show for the Schaubühne, working with a British writer, Chris Bush, where we produce 10 short films digitally, and where we introduce all of these characters, and they go out in the spring of next year. And then in the autumn, you see all of those characters 5 years before meeting and having a dinner party. So it's just so exciting to blend those. And then obviously working on the Zero Travel project. I've spent a lot of time with scientists talking about the environment, and also with the wonderful British scientist, actually, Chris Rapley, just drilling down again into what's happening and how we can make pieces of theatre about that subject without emptying the theatres, because it's not a very happy subject. So I've been busier than normal.
Yeah.
And
Ben, you've been
busy.
Yeah, that's very exciting. And I mean, again, we've talked a bit about this, but some of those projects we will probably help develop or be maybe involved in for the next little while whilst you're visiting fellow. Ben, you talked about being fallow. I find that a really interesting kind of metaphor, because of course it's also an environmental metaphor. You know, land has to be fallow for a while for the ground to be then fertile at some other point. So I don't think you need to I'm not your therapist, but I don't think you need to feel bad about.
Well, funnily enough, my therapist told me it was all right.
Yeah, good. Oh, right. But it's also true you've been filming, and I think you've been filming. Is filming different now to what it's normally like? In other words, do you all have to be in bubbles, and do you have to work separately, or?
I did one day finishing off something that I had not quite finished in March.
Okay.
So I couldn't really say, but it was weird because you meet a whole bunch of people and all you can see is this.
Yeah.
But you know, we'll get used to that, and we'll find creative ways around it. I know we will.
Strange, aren't they, Ben, when they happen? I remember having a Zoom call with at La Colline in Paris, and in the Zoom call they're all in masks because they'd suddenly put an edict out that you had to wear masks in the office, and that was just really weird.
Yeah, just seeing people's eyes is. It's going to be anyway. It's very strange.
Okay, so here's a technical question then, which somebody's just sent in, which I think is really interesting to both of you or either of you. Do you think that the difference between the technical skills required for stage and screen action will become blurred in this kind of Zoom world, precisely because of face? You know, TV skills involve this as much as anything else, and you've been working with that in the live cinema stuff. Will this new domain in which we're operating mean that the skills about technical skills for actors will become blurred? Or maybe you don't think you're doing something different anyway, Ben, when you're acting on stage or on film?
Oh, I think Ben may not agree with that. Ben, do you think it's different on stage and on?
Yes,
it's hugely different, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so this live stream show that you're going to do, are you going to be a screen actor or a stage actor while you're doing it?
It's a really good question, because I do see what you mean of it is live. There's one go at it. You can't go back, can't call cut.
Yeah.
Sorry, Siri is saying hello to me.
I love the sort of tectonic thing about our private lives and our public lives are sort of like crunch together, don't they, because of the Zoom situation at home. But Ben was saying,
yes, but so it's going to be a really interesting sort of mashup of the two, and something else, because acting, I can imagine, like this on a Zoom call isn't like acting for a camera either. So it's not really, it's a completely new thing.
I think new thing is the way of looking at it. And I think we've probably got to train for it and think about it and reflect on how to do it really well. Because I think it's probably quite complicated to do acting on Zoom. My students had to do my last year students, their final project, because of the pandemic, had to go on to Zoom. And you could see them investigating all of the challenges of it. It's really hard. And sometimes you can see the actors crunching their way through it, you know. It's difficult, I think.
I'm cheekily want to ask whether Stanislavski is going to help you with that, and I can see actually it probably will, of course, because it's the same work. It's about how to be present in the moment, as you say.
Well, the thing that I think that's really exciting about it, if we think that there's about 200 muscles on the face, and the muscles are the things that articulate a lot of the inner feeling or emotions. So there is a sense in which everyone's going to get the director's view of the acting, e.g. very close. You know, so the privilege of being a director is you sit super close to the acting.
Yep.
You really see the detail of it.
Yep.
That's part of my original wish to bring cameras into theatre, is so that everyone sees that detail, A, and B, the actor doesn't have to amplify it a bit for the people who are sitting 10 seats back. So I think there's something really gorgeous about the detail of Zoom. Don't you think? And when one could really, I mean, this is a prelude to our project, isn't it, Ben, whatever it is. You can really, really work on that detail. But also there's something about the Zoom is always putting people in their private spaces. And I think there's something really interesting about that.
It's a good point. Yeah.
Really, really interesting. You know, I've been teaching all this time. I've got a 14-year-old teenager behind me, always aware of that. And it's lovely to have her so close. But it definitely modulates my behavior in a completely different way.
Yeah. I wonder also, again, in response to one of the questions that comes through, going back to the diversity point that you made earlier about directors being largely from, white and male. You didn't say that, but that's what you meant. I think, is this new mode going to democratize representation in a way, bring more people into the space of performance? Because, we've all got this kit, or haven't we all got this kit? I mean,
yeah, we all have this kit. I think it, I hope it does. But I hope also that happens in the live performance when we come back to it, before we go away from it again. So I think, yes, definitely. I think it could be a lovely interim platform for sort of people to be free to take charge of theatre for us. Our time is past, and reimagine it. Yeah, so I think, yes, I think to that.
Ben, do you have thoughts on that?
I just completely agree. And I think, it's the thing of that you hear people talking about, of wanting things to go back to how they were.
Yeah.
But I don't.
No, nor me.
Do that. And I think a lot of people don't. So it is a time to really think about where we want it to go and what new work we might make, and the kinds of stories and how we tell those stories, and who's telling the stories. It's all very exciting, really. It's all up for grabs. I hope. I've got no interest in going back. We must go forward.
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
And there are lots of really exciting new ideas, like localism, for example, which I find really, really interesting. So
What's that about, Katie? What's that been about?
As I understand it, and I'm just coming to it, is the idea that basically you start to function locally within your immediate community. So I was reflecting as I was cycling through my local park, and there was a young group of people doing Shakespeare in the park. I thought, maybe that's what I'll end up doing. I'll just be directing shows in my local park. And that's actually quite a nice thought, actually.
Yeah.
As opposed to traveling across the world with an awful carbon footprint. Although I am not flying, I'm on the wretched trains. But
yeah,
look, it's basically, as I understand it, Wes, you'll know more about it. It's a movement for putting our energies into making environmental change or artistic contributions locally.
Yep.
As opposed to thinking and working globally. And that is really exciting.
I mean, in a way, it goes back to the youth theatre moment that you started with, Ben. In other words, the shows happening kind of in your community, with your community, locally, and being made in some sense for the community, or with the community. I mean, of course, other kinds of theatre are still going to go on and carry on, as will other kinds of TV and filmmaking. But and local is interesting, because I've just had a little note saying here that countries represented in the audience at the moment: Japan, Belgium, UK, China, Philippines, US, Singapore, Spain, Italy, Hong Kong. So local will mean lots of different things in all the various different places in terms of the people who are online watching us now. And I suppose that's, again, another question that's come through here, which is, as well as sort of potentially democratizing things, what's clear, you touched on this earlier, Katie, is that this sort of new digital space is kind of both somewhere and everywhere at the same time. And I wonder if we can just reflect on that for a few minutes, the sort of the local, but also the global, the relation to either in terms of the project that you were talking about, Katie, so a kind of a transferable project from one place to another, or, you've done a lot of work in Germany. I hope you don't mind my saying your German is not amazing. In other words, you've nonetheless managed to transfer, and you've worked in Russia, and so you've transferred a kind of a way of being into something that's not rooted in a particular language or in a particular culture. So does that mean that the global is there, or is each time do we need to be local wherever we are?
I really don't know, but what I do know is that we have to stop flying. And we have to stop consuming carbon like this. And therefore, that means we cannot have this international cultural travel. The products can't travel like they're traveling, and the productions can't be made like they've been made. With the highest cost for an international production is transport and accommodation, but particularly transport. So I think it's just a great moment. And it's fantastic to hear the number of countries people are from in our age. So this is like positive globalization, where, you know, we all can meet across a lot of countries on Zoom and talk about different things that I think we can do locally. And we can share ideas across this, you know, this digital platform, but not necessarily have to travel anymore. Because the environmental catastrophe, which the pandemic is a sign of, isn't separate from, it's a real elephant in the room. So that all those models are redundant. They've got to be changed. We've got to have new systems. And I think it's very exciting, the idea that I could be directing a show in an entirely different country and not go there, and vice versa. I think these are very exciting possibilities.
Is that,
to be honest, I've been such a hermit for the last 6 months. This is the first time I've done some Zoom calls with my family and things, but this is the first time. These are questions that I'm just starting to think about, and I feel actually very inspired just by hearing you talk about them. So I'm open to...
I'm imagining it's much, much harder for a performer to embrace this than for a director. Because you're, I don't know, but you're kind of stock in trade. What you work with is a kind of presence, is being there in some way. So I can't see how you would get quite as excited as Katie about not being somewhere.
Well, but I agree with Katie that we have to get used to not being somewhere. We do have to, you know, we're going to have to really change our behaviour. So I'm all up for embracing what the change needs to be. But yes, but I think that's something we'll learn about, because you do think, how can I act with somebody on a over my computer, and how do you have what about physicality and presence and everything else that's so important to
Okay, let's do a thought experiment then on this one, just to finish off, because we're coming up to 5:02, so we've got about 5 more minutes. I've sort of, one of the questions that somebody's asked, well, there's 2 more questions left, let's take them. But the thought experiment is, so the ideas that we've just been discussing in the last 5-10 minutes, how would they have made the show that you did at the Shed last year different? So that if one of you could just say a sentence or 2 about what the show was, I mean, I can introduce it.
It was Anne Carson's doing a Greek tragedy based on Helen's Euripides, and modernizing it by imagining that Helen was Marilyn Monroe. Crudely speaking.
And performed by an actor, and Renee Fleming. So it was a very peculiar set of ingredients, I think it's fair to say, Katie.
That's right.
But I think it's such an interesting question, because it would have worked brilliantly, I think. In a way.
It could have been really good on a digital platform. And I do have to say that I didn't even go to the US.
It's true.
I don't fly on principle. So it was
too.
already inside a new model, and we rehearsed it therefore locally in the UK. So it was it already had some elements of this, didn't it? But I think it would work really well on a digital platform, would you say?
Definitely. Ben? And also because it was not, it had no, it wasn't a play, it wasn't an opera, it wasn't a poetry reading, it was not, you couldn't define it. So it was already in its own strange space, wasn't it? So
it was already both ancient.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, well, it was already both ancient Euripides and very modern Anne Carson. It was already male and female. I mean, there was all sorts of binaries that were being, if you like, deconstructed live on stage. Now you guys are saying, and we could do that on Zoom, or at least on a digital platform. Is that right?
Yeah, I think, it would have worked. I mean, we'd have to rethink a few things, but you could totally perform the text, and Renee could perform the score, and it would work with on a Zoom. It'd be completely possible, wouldn't it, Katie?
Yeah, it would be, and quite exciting, maybe.
Yeah, quite exciting. But man, yeah.
Okay, maybe we've hatched an idea here. But but lastly, but you did that in the shed, yeah, in this new space in New York.
Yeah.
And I guess that comes to a kind of a final point, which is so somebody said, how can you grow new talent and new spaces for this new performance mode? And in a way, the shed was already invented for that. So the shed, you know, I've not been there because, yeah, not because I, in principle, don't fly, but because I haven't been to the States for a while yet. But you made the show, or the show was made for that space, I think, at least partly, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So can you talk us a bit through a bit about how you make a show for a particular space? What the process of commissioning is? How does a show get made like that?
The problem is, I'd really like to answer that question, but the space was being built, so we didn't actually know the space. And actually,
okay.
when Ben and the team and my associate who represented me over there, Lily McLeish, went over, it was a building site, literally, and they had to wear hard hats to rehearse. So in a way, it was such a strange, exceptional experience in relationship to it, building actually coming up around you as you're trying to tech. How is it on the ground, Ben? It's hard to take it as a model, but how is it for you, Ben?
Well, it was hilarious because we all got sent home one day because the space was unsafe to be in.
Still building it, so it was just
it was being built around us while we were rehearsing the final bit of rehearsal in there.
But that's very exciting, no?
It was exciting. It was fun and funny and exciting and a bit scary.
But projects come together in a whole variety of different ways, don't they? I mean, sometimes an organization will say, do you want to direct this or do you want to act this? And sometimes you go to an organization, you say, I would like to direct this, or maybe you go to someone and say, I'd like to act this. But in this case, it had the weirdest evolution, didn't it? Because Ben rang me. You explain it, Ben, the evolution of this project. You were in New York with Renee and Anne.
This is very odd. Yes, yes, I was in New York with Renee and Anne and Alex Poots, who is the artistic director of The Shed. And Anne had written this text and asked if I would like to perform it. I really love Anne, and we'd worked on something else together. Alex Poots had decided it needed another element other than just an actor, and said he knew Renee Fleming. Maybe there was some kind of chorus because it was built from a Greek text. Anne said, yeah, it could have a singer. So Renee came on board, but then we had nothing else. We had no way of transforming this text into a performance, and no one in the room had a clue how to do it. And
that's when you phone a friend.
I know Katie Mitchell. She does opera and she does Greek plays. I'll ring her, and I did. And then that's how it happened. So that's a very weird. That's a
very, very, very unusual procedure.
But that's a shame, because it seems to me a perfect procedure. In that, you know, performer loves a text, loves a writer's work, needs to then go and find some way of that operating, making that happen, remembers having worked with somebody else who's kind of got the tools, off we go. I mean, I suppose what's lucky about that is that you also had the producer on board, or I would
say in retrospect, it was a little bit the wrong way round, to be honest. It felt, but anyway, maybe I shouldn't. We're running out of time, and maybe it's too much to go.
No, I'm just interested. I'll tell you why I'm interested. Partly because precisely this is partly me thinking from our perspective in Torch and in relation to the new Humanities Centre and so on. How do we bring together academic work, research into performance, into the history of performance, into Greek, into, you know, the history of theatre, with artists? And how do you generate that work in what will be a new space? You know, that is going to be a built space, as well as a digital space. You know, how does that work happen? And clearly there are lots of different ways. But whether it leads with the poet, whether it leads with the director, whether it leads with the performer and so on, what's the thing that makes that actually feasible?
Well, it's an idea connection, isn't it, between either a group of artists or artists and academics. And it's a very fragile, tiny thing. So, so someone has a hunch that some idea would be possible, in the same way that Ben had this hunch. He had this hunch that you could, with a fantastic opera singer like Rennie Fleming, fantastic actor like himself, and Carson's text, if you could just get that fourth person there, then all of those ingredients would coalesce. But I think the seeds of things are quite fragile, and you can often miss them. There's a seed of an idea coming, you just don't notice it. So providing a sort of environment like you are, Wes, and providing context like this for these sorts of conversations can often breed things.
We're back to fallow. You need some fallow ground to plant the seed, and then you need the water, the resources and all the rest of it to make the seed grow, I guess. But okay, we're running out of time. Have we forgotten anything? Is there anything you really want to think about that we haven't said? I don't think so. I think I've really enjoyed this, and I think we've
it was lovely. It's really interesting, actually. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I think we've sort of just about run out of time. Thank you to both of you, are brilliant speakers, for a wonderful and really, actually, I think, enriching conversation. I have to say thank you also to the viewers at home who've sent in their questions. I say home, there's all sorts of homes represented here in a whole range of different places. And also thank you to the backstage crew, the people at Torch who've made all this possible. But of course, the biggest thanks go to our two speakers. Thank you again, Ben, and thank you also, Katie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Our next Big Tent live event will take place in 2 weeks' time. On Thursday, the 8th of October at 5 p.m. We will be live from an Oxford venue with a world premiere performance from the Villiers Quartet. We'll also be speaking with Professor Dan Grimley from the music faculty, who will introduce and explain the significance of the performance, and Dr. Joanna Bullivant, also from the music faculty, who will be chairing the evening. We hope you'll be able to join us again then. And if you want to catch up on any of the other previous events on Big Tent, they're all on the Torch website. Thank you so much again for joining us, one and all, and hope to see you in a couple of weeks' time. Goodbye.